Hello, I'm here today because I want to talk to you about a book called Half Bad by Sally Green. This is a book that I reread around a month ago now, and that I originally read when I was around 16, and I was obsessed with it. That and the full trilogy, no notes, I was convinced this was a perfect trilogy. So if you're new to my channel, I'm doing something that I'm calling a rereading challenge, where I had made a video back when I was around 17 years old, talking about my favorite books at the time. And I made a very specific list, and I thought it would be fun to go through that list now, 10 years later, and reread those books and see if they hold up. So I finished rereading Half Bad at the beginning of this month, and a lot of it has gone out of my head already, I'm not gonna lie. It's not a very sticky book nowadays to me, it's not sticking. So Half Bad is a YA fantasy written in 2014. I believe the reason I originally picked up this book is because I really liked the cover. I am very attracted to like those full black covers and the black and red color scheme. Like my bandana, as I'm just realizing now, really attracted me at that time. And the universe in Half Bad is a universe where witches and humans live alongside each other. And witches are divided by being black witches and white witches. Very clearly an allegory for race in modern day Britain. So black witches are generally seen as evil, and throughout the book are increasingly oppressed by the white witches, who are seen as the good people, and the majority of the witch population are white. So we follow a 17-year-old protagonist called Nathan, who is a half white, half black witch, also known as a half-code, and his father is one of the most infamous black witches who is currently on the run from the White Witch Council. So the council is watching his every move as he approaches his 17th birthday, where in this world you receive 3 gifts from one of your parents and then receive your main gift, which is your power as a witch. The story jumps around in time quite a bit, so you're not always following 17-year-old Nathan, but you're seeing him grow up from around 11 to 12 years old through to his 17th birthday. It's told in a non-chronological order. I think that's the most I'm going to talk about the plot. There is a Netflix TV show called The Bastard Son and the Devil Himself. I have not watched this show. It came out in 2022, and at that point I didn't really consider rereading Half Bad, but I originally held that trilogy so close to my heart that I didn't really want to go and watch the TV show. It didn't look like it was very faithful. I didn't feel like watching an adaptation that didn't seem to stand up by itself or be a faithful adaptation. I don't know if that show led any more people to the book. I feel like the Half Bad trilogy has kind of faded out. When it came to rereading the book, how did I feel? I think I was maybe around a quarter through the book when I wrote down that I was enjoying this so far, but definitely not nearly as much as I did when I was younger, and that I'm not really a fan of this. I made a note again to say I think I was just way too lenient with how I used to consider some of my books to be a favorite, and I didn't really have like a very strict criteria, which is fine. That you don't have to have a strict criteria, but I don't think it aged well. My main thought throughout this entire book is, holy shit, this is way darker than I ever remember. We're going to go into mild spoiler territory here again, but Nathan is essentially tortured throughout the entirety of this book. As I said, this book jumps around in time, around Nathan's life, but we start off when he is 16 years old, trapped in a cage by a white witch, overlooked by the Council of White Witches. And he's quite literally on a training regime where he has to do a huge run in the morning and the evening. He's fed, but like he's very much physically, verbally abused by a white witch. They train him up to be this amazing fighter, but you see his perspective at this time. He is literally like so fucking traumatized. To start a book like that is a really interesting choice, particularly as Sally Green decided to use second person pronouns here. So Nathan's perspective at the very beginning is essentially saying, you can't let the cage get to you. You can open your eyes now, and there is a few minutes to savor the sunrise. And you've still got a minute, maybe even 2, to get your head together before she appears. So we're put into like a very pragmatic mindset of this teenager who is literally kept in a cage, forced to exercise and be watched essentially 24/7. Overall, this book is just so much darker than I remembered. And I guess it hammers home the point of oppression, but it is pretty bleak. Nathan is brought up in a fairly loving family life, where he lives with his half-siblings who are white witches. So they share the same mother, but he is the only one with the black witch father. As Nathan grows older, you see these orders come through, increasingly oppressive by the White Witch Council, essentially saying that if you end up harboring a Black Witch, you will be jailed. What I think Sally Green does here well is the acceleration of aggression from the council, and it takes years, but it accelerates quickly over those years, and in increments that close the gaps scarily fast on making Black witches illegal, and any support of Black witches by white witches illegal. This too applies to Nathan as a half-code. Half-codes, even being half white, are not safe from these laws. Council essentially classes all Black witches and anyone with Black witch blood as a dangerous, violent race. What I find an interesting omission though, and I don't really know how Sally Green feels about it, is that race as we know it in our world isn't really discussed at all in this book, which is a choice when your whole book is discussing oppression of a certain race of people, but a witch race. I'm still mulling over that fact because I also can't remember if this is built into the second or third book. Sorry, I just went and took a 3-hour break. So spoiler alert, there's a character called Gabrielle in this book. When rereading this first book, I could not remember if Gabrielle was revealed to love Nathan or if that was in the second book. So I was pleasantly surprised when we get the reveal in book 1 and Nathan and Gabrielle are kind of like a thing. I remember thinking when I first read this book, oh, the author is dropping a lot of hints that Gabrielle and Nathan are like, should be a thing, but I couldn't figure out if it was just one of those like romance things or if the author was actually going to go there. However, I'm going to say the pros of this book end there, and I'm going to move on to the cons. The main one being that the pacing of this book is just bizarre. I don't know if this comes down to the non-chronological order of this book, because the first half or so of the book is absolutely fine. I'd say the pacing is a little on the slow side, but nothing too noticeable. However, you hit a certain point in the book and in the story where I feel like nothing much happens to propel the story forwards. And the reason that it's so strange is because there's so much that the author could be doing. It's not that there's no plot to progress, I just feel like the author chooses to slow it down significantly so. The ending of book 1 is just really anticlimactic. I thought that book 1 ended at a different point in the story than I remembered, and I thought that somewhere in book 2 was where book 1 ended, because that would have made more sense as a way to kind of just complete that part of the story arc, but no. I personally left book 1 feeling dissatisfied, feeling as though there was much more needed to round off the entire experience of book 1, and that too much time was spent before then, like kind of around 3/4 into the book, where I was like, what are we doing right now? We're stagnating a little bit. Ultimately, you reach the end of book 1 and it feels like too much of a cliffhanger or just a sudden abrupt stop in order for book 2 to be introduced. Overall, the writing style felt overly simplistic. I think it might be fair enough to argue that this is trying to reflect Nathan's lack of education. I saw this more as adding to Nathan's voice, like the writing is reflecting the state of Nathan's thoughts. This boy has been so traumatized and hasn't really managed to get through the traditional schooling system because of how discriminated against he is, that he never really develops his language any further than what we see in the book. That's how I chose to read it and interpret it, and it makes a bit more sense. But I can understand how a lot of people would be turned off by this, because at some point the book does get a little repetitive in its language. I had to kind of keep reminding myself, I think this is an intentional choice made by the author to just reflect Nathan's characterization, like we're reading from his perspective. So really there isn't going to be a lot of complex language used. On the topic of race, I think my main issue comes to the fact that it feels like a bit of a cop-out to have this huge allegory about racism between white and black witches and half-codes and all of that, to then not really address the racism that we know and that we see, because people of color exist in this universe. And I just find it a little hard to believe that in this universe there is also no racism based on skin color. It just doesn't really fit. So in the end, what did I rank half bad after rereading it? I gave it 3 stars out of 5. So it was average. Again, just mid, I'd say. Whilst I'm here, I wanted to kind of do a recap of how I'm getting along in my rereading challenge. A recurring theme that I'm seeing in most of these books is that the concepts were very interesting. I think one of the reasons I stated that Half Bad was a favourite book back then was because you didn't really see male witches. I think I enjoyed kind of the gender subversion. The division here when it came to magic, this magic system, wasn't based on gender, it was based on race. That was an interesting concept to me. So I'm noticing a pattern where the execution of said concept isn't the best now that I go back and read it, but the concepts I'm still finding interesting. So we're almost halfway through this rereading challenge. I've read 6 out of the 13 books that I listed. I wonder, of the books that I have left to read, how many are more conceptually interesting than they are in actuality. I will see if I can prove my theory correct. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video where I talked through Half Bad by Sally Green and some of my thoughts. But yes, have a good day everyone, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.